What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. Very happy to say we have our first guest of the pre-season on to talk through his draft. I'm sure many of you know him, Statman Dave, YouTube extraordinaire, Man United fan, and on the BBC 606 Fantasy podcast, or at least he will be soon. Dave, how you doing?
Yeah, very good. Good off season. Forgot about fantasy football for a bit, but as I've messaged you, Andy, I've been changing this team a lot. I've had loads of different ideas, and I'm kind of really excited for this season. I think it could be good from a football perspective, but also from an FPL perspective. There's a lot of interesting picks and so forth.
Yeah, I think that's the general vibe of people during pre-season, is that because they've got the prices right, that means there's decisions to be made. So as we're going to see from your team in a sec, you've got two premiums in there, Salah and Haaland. I've only got one. I think a lot of people are split on how to kind of go with it. So yeah, it should be a good FPL season. We'll see how it goes. Let's just jump straight into it and have a look at your team. Usual caveats apply. The deadline's still a few days away.
Yep.
Things can change, absolutely. But I think a lot of these players will end up in your team because they're mostly solid picks. We'll talk about some of them I'm a little bit less sure about. But let's start with a big question. You've got Salah and Haaland.
Yeah.
Do you want both of them? Do you think you're going to definitely stick with both?
I think this is kind of the big question, right? I think Haaland is too good and rested to ignore. So I think he's got to be in there. I couldn't see myself without Haaland. Salah, on the other hand, from watching Liverpool in pre-season, they've kind of changed away from Jurgen Klopp's system, and they're looking like a little bit more box in midfield. They're not really playing with a striker at the moment. Of course, in the last game, we saw that brilliant assist from Trent to Jota goal. The change has come from the striker isn't really inside anymore, and you're looking at Diaz and Salah are kind of keeping the height and the width of the team. So from that idea, Salah's going to stay in there. At the same time, I love Jarell Quansah. I think he's a really, really good player, and he's kind of made that starting spot next to Virgil van Dijk his own in pre-season. I expect that to continue. Liverpool defensively should be really good under Arne Slot. His stats with Feyenoord were fantastic, pressing X, Y, and Z. So at the moment, I quite like Quansah, I like Jota, and I like Salah and Trent. So at the moment, if I could, I'd pick 4 Liverpool players. So I'm going to have to come up with a bit of a ranking and an order of who I go with on deadline day. But Quansah's too cheap. Trent's too cheap as well for his price point. Obviously, the lowest it's been for 4 years. Is Andy? Is that right?
It's around there, yeah. It's around there.
And then you've got, obviously, Mohamed Salah versus Jota. I'd love to have 4 players, but unfortunately, we're going to have to one. I think Salah will be in there, Andy.
So judging by what you're saying, a lot of people have asked me about this. You're not really worried about any drop-off from Klopp to Slot?
I was concerned initially. So watching Feyenoord, I think there were signs that Feyenoord were quite similar to Erik ten Hag's Ajax team, where they were super offensive. They threw bodies forward. They played with a sole holder, and they pressed in a bit of a disjoint manner where it worked in the Eredivisie, but that style doesn't work in the Premier League. We've also, seen Erik ten Hag slightly adapt his press already in pre-season. That being said, he's been playing 2 defensive midfielders in pre-season. The press looks really good. You've also got to think about the changeover from 2 managers. Think about Moyes to Martinez. We had a defensive manager to an offensive manager, where it really worked out for us in FPL. I think it'll have a similar thing to that, Andy, where we'll actually get the defensive solidity of Jurgen Klopp's side with Arne Slot's offensive side of the game. So Liverpool could even be better than they might have been under Jurgen Klopp.
Better? Well, that's a big shout. That's a spicy call. I think the fixtures are just there, and they've got.
Yeah,
it's a simple way of looking at it. But they've got so many good players. They're not going to suddenly be a terrible team. And like you said, they've got more players that you could want. Like you've got Trent, Salah, and Quansah. There's plenty of others you could choose from as well. Like, do you worry about having someone like Quansah on the bench because you've got a 4.5 million in Jebison? I know Solanke's gone, but I think he might go as well. I don't think he's going to play. And you got Fast as well. So if Quansah did lose his place to Kanate, you got no bench. You've got
that? A bit. I think that's a bit of an issue. So I did have Harwood Bellis coming into this week, where the rotation, I believe you probably spoke about this, between Leicester, Southampton, and Newcastle is really nice over the first kind of 8 game weeks. So that's always an option to get 0.5 again, and then maybe go with a Jota and Salah in midfield with Trent. The thing with Quansah, though, in terms of like when I look at centre-backs in European football, I look for a number of different things. I look for some possession statistics. I look for some defensive dual win rates from an aerial perspective on the ground. Quansah is literally one of the best young centre-backs in Europe. And I don't think we can't ignore that. I don't think Liverpool ignore that. So it's definitely a worry from an FPL perspective. So going into the deadline, I'll probably have to make that call between it. But I love the idea of having a double Liverpool defence in those opening sort of 8 to 10 fixtures where you really could grab some cheap points. You think about kind of, the Liverpool defence is the starters are above 6 million. You're getting this guy for 4.5. Even if maybe Andy on that first wild card, you got to get him out. I don't think it's the worst option in the world.
Yeah, and a lot of people are talking about how an early wildcard might be viable. I'm kind of on the fence. Not that it's a bad idea. I'm just going to wing it, probably, is the honest answer. But yeah, no, I like Quansah. I think he's going to start. I don't think there's much doubt about that. I think he will start in game week 1. So you've got to think if he continues to perform, he'll keep his place. And Konate will just come in at some point later on. So yeah, I quite like that pick. And I think he's going to get more and more popular as we get closer to Friday. Just quickly on Haaland, because obviously everyone knows how good he is. Do you have any worries about the late returnees to Man City? Because Rodri, Foden, Kyle Walker, none of them were in the Community Shield squad. Is Chelsea away, so they might get thrown in because it's a difficult fixture? But if not, we might see minutes off the bench against it. Do you think that's going to have any effect on Haaland?
I think not against Chelsea. I think Chelsea are a team that are very, very open at the moment. Defensively, they're all kind of all over the place. Who's the best centre-back pairing with Levy Colwell? The right back, Reece James has just been injured. I think City's run at the start is okay for that, for having players coming back late. On top of that, you've got someone like, a Jack Grealish in the early part of the season that's going to want to prove something. I think Kevin De Bruyne after his pretty poor spell for Belgium, you'd say, at the Euros. Again, maybe his last season at Manchester City. I just think Haaland could be an absolute weapon going forward in the league this season. I think this is more a Haaland first season than Haaland second season in terms of the levels that he'll get to, just because of that fact that first season, he was a bit of an unknown. Second season, people adapt to him. He's going to have to adapt his game to get better, and he's doing that under Pep Guardiola. So I don't think there'll be too much concern. But also, Andy, you look at Oscar Bob. The amount of talent that lad's got. We saw Savinho as well, someone that I've seen in La Liga for Girona. These are two really good young wingers. So in terms of production, you think if Salvinho plays on the left-hand side, natural left-footed crosses, that's going to be even more service for Erling Haaland. So I'm not too worried. The one thing I am worried about with Haaland, I don't think it's in terms of the players coming out. I just think it's that price point. Is 15 million, Andy, too much for someone like Haaland?
Well, this is why the pricing is so good, because last year there was no conversation to be had, even at 14, because everyone else was so cheap. You just had him in. But now it's not only him that's gone up, it's like everyone else. I think it's a case that we won't have him all season.
Okay.
So I think that's the decision later on. And I can see people maybe swap, if they start with him, swapping him out maybe around game weeks 4, 5, 6, possibly even drop down to someone like Watkins, who's not in a huge amount of teams right now, and then possibly even use that money to get Salah if you don't have him. But I think for the start of the season, like you said, he's had all pre-season off from international duty. Like for me, the Ipswich game in game week 2 is massive. And Chelsea, they look better a little bit in their last pre-season friendly, but ultimately, over the games they've had, it's not been great. What's coming out from Maresca has not sounded that great either. I think it's not easy to go to Chelsea away, but he will get chances, and then you follow it up with Ipswich. I think 15 million is fine, honestly. I think there are cheaper players you can go in, so I'm going to have him. I've pretty much decided I'm going to go with him. It's just Salah that I'm a little bit more on the fence about. I'm just going to quickly read through the whole team, so I realise I didn't do that at the start, and some people might be listening to this on podcast. So just really quickly, right? Henderson in goal, Porro, Trent, who we just spoke about, Dan Burn in defence, Smith Rowe and Kunku, Eze, Gordon, Salah in midfield, Solanke just gone to Spurs up front with Haaland, and then Quansah, Jefferson, Fass on the bench, and then 4 million goalkeeper in Matthews. Eze, I've spoken about him a lot. He's been in every single draft. Mateta's maybe going to be back slightly late, but I don't think he'll miss a huge amount of games. And I think, if anything, him playing in the Olympics is probably better than pre-season games. It's probably a bit more competitive. So in terms of fitness, he's probably already there. Do you worry about Elise going?
I think I do, yeah. I think, Oliver Glasner's done really well in the Premier League. 5th in the league since he joined. Obviously, we saw Mateta's goals, top goal scorer. Elise is a weird player in a sense of last season he was so dominant when he was on the pitch and the minutes were a problem with his injuries. He's a creative player that plays inside right. They don't really have a like for like in that position, a left-footed player that can be creative, can score goals and so forth. That being said, I think they've got enough. I think, Sarr coming back to the Premier League, we saw the damage he could do at Watford from an FPL perspective. You've got Kamada as well that could play that role. Eze's influence in the team should just get even more. So in terms of set pieces, penalties, it's a really, really good pick. I think the question mark on Mateta, there was reports that he looked quite tired at the back end of the Olympics. Is that going to be an issue going into the first few games? I'd argue if he starts on the bench the first game, that could be good for him and then build into that. When you're in form, you're flying, and he's been flying. His goal record in the last 20 games is absolutely ridiculous. So I think Oliver Glasner at the start of the season will be good. I think Palace are a good team to get on at the start. What I'd say is when teams start to adapt to Crystal Palace and then they go through the tougher fixture run, then maybe looking to replace an Eze. But Henderson in goal, I love that pick. I think that's a really, really good pick for this season. Not only was it 10 clean sheets for Crystal Palace last season in the league, it was only Manchester City, Arsenal, and Everton that got more clean sheets. Oliver Glasner's side, they always kind of traditionally very defensively solid, and they do play quite well on the counter. So I do like the Henderson shout. I think he'll have a lot of shots to save as well. So I think they're the two players at Palace I'd look at, and then maybe Mateta, a little bit later in the season.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I've got Henderson in my current draft. Spoiler alert for anyone that's going to watch the video tomorrow. I'm kind of the same on Eze. I just think there might be a drop-off because of Elise going, but I just think him individually then becomes a better FPL pick because more stuff's going to have to go through him. So, yeah, I really like that. Broader question. You got no Man United players in this draft. You're a big Man United fan. Any interest? Personally, I think De Ligt and is it Mazraoui?
And Mazraoui.
Okay, I've got almost. I think that would improve the Man United defence, but I still worry about what's in front. So defensively, I'm kind of out unless I go for Onana, but I just think there's better options for the money. It's attacking wise where I'm semi-interested. The likes of Garnacho got minutes in the Community Shield. Is there any chance a Man United player is going to make it into your team?
So I like Amad Diallo. I think Amad Diallo is going to have a breakthrough season at Manchester United this season. He's kind of the only natural left-footed right attacker United have got. I think he's levels above Anthony. He just is in terms of goal scoring.
Right?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I didn't want to be too harsh, Andy. Look, you stepped in there with the drop kick. I was just trying to give him a little punt down the field and then deal with it there. But no, so I definitely would say Amad Diallo just because of his budget. The pricing's really good. Alejandro Garnacho once again showed in the Community Shield why he spoke about being one of the best young players in the world. In terms of his goal involvements for Manchester United, only Cristiano Ronaldo managed more as a teenager as a non-British player. So the quality is really there. So Garnacho and Mad are two players I like. The only thing I'd worry about those two maybe is rotation, and minutes are a bit of a concern as well. Marcus Rashford will hit form at some point. I thought in the Community Shield, as much as his finishing wasn't quite right, he was getting into the right positions, which, as you know, Andy, from an XG perspective, that's good. If he wasn't getting into those positions, I'd be more worried. I don't want to pick any of those guys from my team yet because I feel like we've got to allow Manchester United maybe to figure out the midfield problem, as you mentioned, Andy. I think that's a big part. United still probably require 2 players in central midfield that need to sign to really improve that team. A bit of a gamble would be having an Amad, and I think he's the only one that's going to be close to my 11. Saying that, Joshua Zirkzee could be an option later on in the season. Højlund could be an option. Bruno Fernandes is always going to score you points. We all know that. Just going to sign a new deal and so forth. So that's guaranteed points, but the pricing's not. I don't like the pricing as much as I like Amad. So I'd say Amad number 1 for United, Bruno number 2, and then I'd pick Rashford when he gets into form at number 3.
I don't know if you did, but I started last season with 2. Fernandes
Andy, I think I was there as well, Andy. Look, we all make silly mistakes
9
sometimes.
game weeks I held them for. It was pure misery.
Andy, I think with you, Andy, you come into form second half of the season. You are basically the Manchester City of FPL, where as soon as you start to make those big plays, let's say you drop, like you're talking about now, the right time to drop Haaland or the right time to drop Salah, I feel like you always get those bang on. So second half of the season, Andy, I'm behind you.
Maybe if I start with no Man United players, I'll already be a little bit ahead.
I think you should have a rule this season to maybe do that. Just there's a bit of bias I feel in you.
Little bit. Another team you don't have any players from, and I think this is a little bit a trickier call, is Arsenal.
So this is where I was speaking about the drafts. So I've got a draft today where we've switched the midfield, where Salah's gone out, and I think Eze's gone out, and we've brought in Diogo Jota, Cole Palmer, and David Raya.
Nice.
So covering that Arsenal defence the cheapest way, right? Because they're all, they're around 6 million. Saying that, one piece of advice from pre-season is to get Zinchenko in for the first maybe 4 or 5 games.
You think
I think his pre-season form has been ridiculous. I think it's going to take a bit of adaptability for Calafiori to get into that first 11. So if you want to get in Arsenal, that's probably the easiest way that's not a goalkeeper. I think that, as we spoke about previously, it's the saves that you're probably not going to get with a David Raya. You're going to get the clean sheets, but you might not get the rest of those bonus points that are attached to keepers as well. So it's a really tough one. I think, Andy, you might have said in one of your previous videos is Arsenal will come, right? We've got to get Arsenal in like 11. Game week 11, when their fixtures kind of really change and we can maybe jump on that defensive bandwagon. So it's a difficult one. I think Kai Havertz would have been great if he was still a midfielder. Of course, he's now a forward. His stats as a centre forward for Arsenal, actually playing the position, directly involved in 14 goals in 12 Premier League games. So massive asset going forward. The only Arsenal player similar to Man United that I like the look of that I will probably go to at some point might be Martinelli. I think great value at 7 million. If you can get back into that starting 11, you're kind of laughing. I just feel at the moment that you can't have Saka and Salah. I don't think you can. The drafts just doesn't work.
Or not with Haaland as well.
Not with Haaland as well, yeah. And I think Haaland moment is a non-negotiable. So it doesn't quite work right now. And I think that's a big weakness in my team, Andy, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth on the kind of £10 million-ish midfielders. I think I've landed on Saka over Palmer, because you also say 0.5 as well. But it's a pretty close call. I think from an attacking point of view, Arsenal were pretty decent, but there are a few dodgy fixtures early on for clean sheets. Got 3 away games first 5, so not great. I think the biggest omission in this team, and only compared to what I'm seeing elsewhere, who do you think it is? There's a player you're missing.
Gvardiol?
No.
No?
There's a forward you're missing that nearly every other person I see has.
Isak?
Yeah.
So this is my thought process here, Andy, because I've had him in a number of drafts. Don't get me wrong, I think he's a brilliant player and will score points. That being said, I think Solanke is perfect for Postecoglou Spurs. 7.5 million, scored 19 goals in the Premier League this last season, was directly involved in 54% of Bournemouth's goals. We all know that Tottenham create a load of chances. They just do under Postecoglou. There's a lot of opportunity for that 9 to get in the box and get on the ball. So I prefer Solanke because he's cheaper. On top of that, I think I've got quite good Newcastle coverage with Davern that might turn into Gurhey if that transfer goes through. But also, I was looking at Anthony Gordon today, and I forgot how well he did last season. 10 plus goals, 10 plus assists. I think that's good coverage. I think for a midfielder, that's good coverage. I like having 2 Newcastle players. I think having 3 is a little bit overkill at the moment. But they're my thoughts right now. This could change, Andy. Don't worry about it.
My bet will be that Isak will be in your team by the time, even if it's with Solanke. Maybe there might be a kind of a bit of a change around in structure, because you're basically on a 3-5-2 now. 3-4-3 might be where it's at. Go on.
That's the question. Why are we seeing more 3-4-3s this season, do you think?
I just think, so it's a tough one. I think for 5.5 million, so like you've got Smith Rowe, for example, right? And I think he's a pretty good pick. The fixtures for Fulham early on are decent. He's got a lot to prove as well. I think he is going to start in a pretty attacking role most weeks, as long as he can stay fit. But up front, you've got like João Pedro for the same price, who also takes penalties. And look, we don't know exactly how Brighton are going to perform, but I think most of us expect them to be fairly attacking, and he will be in and around the goals. So I think you've got good value players like that compared to the midfielders. Isak he's a lock for most people's teams. And then if you want Haaland as well, you've only got 3 spots, right?
Yeah.
There's not a huge amount of great forwards, but there's enough to kind of almost warrant using the 3 spaces. Like for me, I think Haaland, Solanke, Isak, João Pedro. Havertz I'm not that interested in, but I don't think he's a bad pick. Muniz as well at Fulham.
So that's what I've got, an alternate draft that's actually switching Smith Rowe to Lavia at Chelsea, and then bringing in Muniz to play as the centre forward, so playing 3-4-3. I don't know. I just feel like we've seen over the years the value of having a 3-5-2.
Yeah.
Like the point potential is ridiculous. And as you know, there'll be bandwagon players at the start of the season. And I think that 5.5 million spot, there's a lot of midfielders in there that could potentially blow up. Semenyo is another one we spoke about previously. Minter that plays for Brighton, who's been scoring for fun in pre-season. And I think there's enough players there to make that a little bit more interesting than the. So, for example, if it's not Joao Pedro, you're probably looking at Adam Armstrong for that
Yeah, for the same
5.5
price, yeah.
million striker. I just feel like we might have a little bit more options in midfield. That being said, I have got drafts with a 3-4-3, so it's still thinking about. And I think if you've not got Salah, it makes that 3-4-3 draft a lot better, right? Because then
Yeah.
you could potentially go with a Isak in there as well as a Solanke and a Haaland, which is good. But I think the thing we forget, Andy, is midfielders score more points than strikers.
Yeah, generally, yeah. I don't know. There's something about like he. I would say like if I ever asked for people to send their drafts in on Twitter just for like a video, he's in like 90% plus. Like that's how popular he is within the general community. He's the highest owned player in the game as well. Like I'm just looking at that. Like I think Gordon's a great pick. I think Solanke and Gordon could be Isak and Garnacho, for example.
Yeah.
And then it gets close then. I think I'm not trying to like talk you out of it. I think Solanke's a really good pick and Gordon, but it's something to consider.
No, definitely. I think it's a really interesting one because it's whether Newcastle are going to score goals this season, aren't they? And it's going to come from their front three players, basically. Harvey Barnes off the bench, Jacob Murphy if he starts, and vice versa. Gordon is going to be scoring goals and getting assists, but Solanke's output as a centre forward is going to be higher. I don't know. I feel like it could be a nice differential that I'm willing to take at the start of the season. But the only thing, as you mentioned there, would just get burnt by ownership, and maybe that's not the smart thing to do at the start of the season.
Yeah, I think ownership. I try and ignore it. I try and just pick my team. Like, for video purposes, like I tend to know what ownership is, just because people ask about it and whatever. But it's best to not look at it, I think. But I think he is so difficult to ignore. I think the problem I've got, like, so Solanke, for example, I think he's a really good pick. But I can think of some downsides, i.e. his minutes might not be quite so good because they've got other options. Bournemouth were always going to play him for 90 minutes. He might lose penalties. He only scored 2 last year, but it's still a few points he could lose. It's not enough to take him out, but there's at least some negatives. With Isak, I can't think of any. I just think Callum Wilson's not fit.
Yeah.
He's going to start. He's on penalties. His minutes are going to be great. Newcastle, I don't think you're in Europe, right? They're not in Europe. So they've got, apart from when the fixture congestion gets bad for everyone, they've got a game every week, so there's no midweek games either. He started 27 times last year, so it wasn't like a massive fitness. Yeah, he's just good. But I will say, it's boring. Everyone's got him. So if you want to back against someone, maybe he's the one.
I think you look at it in this sense. Anthony Gordon was directly involved in 21 goals, playing from midfield. Isak was directly involved in 23 goals. So that points difference is going to be pretty similar. I'm not sure if you've got it to screen right now, but I imagine last season they were quite close, were they, in terms of total points?
They probably were. Let me just bring it up here. Newcastle. So Gordon got 183 and Isak got 172. But I would guess Gordon played more minutes. So he played 2,900 and Isak played 2,200. Now, that is one plus with Gordon. He very rarely gets injured, always plays. But I think when they both play, you should expect Isak to outscore him, I think.
I think just on that as well, if you look at Isak's career from being in the Bundesliga through to La Liga and now Premier League, he's never played over 2,400 minutes. So that's if for example, really stretching the budget out in our teams where we like my bench, as he said, Andy, could be absolutely done. Kanate comes back and my bench is finished. I'm playing Vault Fast every single week because the rest of my team's injured. But that being said, if you've got Isak, that probably means you need a slightly stronger bench, right?
Yeah, maybe. I think the 27 starts last year is promising. I think that's shown that he can get more minutes. But you're right, he's still only 2,200. There were times last year when he was out. But I guess if he got injured, it's probably a transfer straight away. I think having a deep bench is good. I think that can... Like, if Isak got like a minor knock and you didn't want to get rid of him, having a deep bench would be good. But if he was out, you'd probably be selling anyway. But yeah, it's just that's the one player you just see everywhere. I mean, just sticking to Newcastle, moving away from Isak, Dan Burn. Obviously, if Gay comes in, you're probably going to switch to him. Do you expect their defence to be better than last year? Because expected goals conceded wise wasn't fantastic.
No, it wasn't. But I think the big thing's Nick Pope, right? He only played 15 games last season. I think it's not only his shot saving and his ability to command the box, but off the line, superb. And it allows Newcastle to play higher. If you watch them last season, Dubravka is a little bit stop-starty when he's come in. Like he's not as clean with his decision making. So I think that'll massively improve. The one concern I've got with Newcastle as well, from an attacking sense, is Kieran Trippier. Didn't finish off the season very well. He obviously got injured in Feb, came back, didn't play very well, and then he's had a pretty average Euros. Is there a player there that could step up? You know, we're looking at a Livramento, we're looking at a Lewis Hall maybe, that could be amazing picks from an attacking sense. I think Dan Burn's the good pick just because he's can play in a lot of different positions. He's a very reliable player in the team. But I do think Newcastle will be better defensively. You've got to remember as well, Andy, they kept 10 clean sheets. As much as they weren't great, they still had 10 clean sheets, and that's without their number one goalkeeper. So I do think they'll be back to their best, to be honest. And the thing you mentioned before as well is not playing twice a week. The big thing going into last season was 2 games a week for that Newcastle squad was too much. It's still too much. You know, FFP's obviously controlled their spending, so they can't go out there and, you know, drop a 90 million, 60 million quid on a player. So the squad's still the same, but as you mentioned, it's just 1 game week, so they should be okay. So I do think, yeah, definitely defensively they'll be much better.
Yeah, I think unless Trippier definitely goes, I think Livramento is just too risky. I think actually a lot of people, even Newcastle fans, would probably say Livramento should be starting based on maybe how Trippier played last year, but I just think it's too risky. And then if they buy Gay, then it could be that Dan Burn goes left back. So Lewis Hall's not even... I think those two are potential to like keep an eye on, but I'm not sure I would go for them in game week 1. All right, overall squad. I'm going to give. I think it actually looks for a Salah and Haaland squad, which I think are difficult to completely nail. I think it doesn't look too bad. I can't go without Isak, and I think the bench is risky. But to be honest, with the bench, even if Kwanzaa was just swapped to a different 4.5 that's absolutely nailed, then you've at least got 2 playing defenders, so you might be able to get away with it.
Here's a question, Andy. Right, so instead of Kwanzaa, go back to Harwood Bellis. 4 million, make 0.5 million, and then upgrade Pedro Porro to Gvardiol. What are your thoughts on Gvardiol? And obviously we mentioned City before. What are your thoughts on City's defence?
So generally, I quite like City's defence. I think for FPL, it feels like they always find a way to concede, but generally they're up there for clean sheets. They don't give away too many chances. My only worry with Gvardiol is he's so popular because of what happened at the back end of last season. He got like 5 goals in 6 or 7 games, 5 returns, whatever. It was a lot of attacking returns in quick succession. I'm not so sure he's going to be as attacking this year. It depends how Pep sets up. It might be that he forms more of a back 3 and he's part of that 3 rather than... I mean, he was like a left winger at times last year. And the word that keeps coming out of Man City is that Grealish and Doku are going to fight for the left, and Savinho and Bob will fight for the right. Now, obviously, Foden and Bernardo Silva can play wide as well, but it just doesn't sound like Gvardiol's necessarily going to be like that far up the pitch. So I like him, but I like him less than I did at the start of pre-season. I don't think he's a bad pick. I think you need those attacking returns because there is obviously a risk with minutes as well. I think he'll start the majority, but it's Man City, right? You can never be completely sure. So that's why I don't currently have him. But if I saw him, I wouldn't try and talk someone out of owning him, for sure.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think from a tactical perspective, City are looking a little bit more like the Centurions team versus what we've previously seen, where we've got both the fullbacks moving into midfield. I think at times we've seen both fullbacks inside, the DM drops to create the back 3, or the goalkeeper to move in between the centre-backs to create the back 3, and those 2 fullbacks inside, like kind of saying. That being said, it opens him up for maybe assists with through balls, maybe shots from outside the box. In comparison to Gvardiol, obviously 6 million, you've got Saliba, you've got Gabriel. They're much higher up in terms of priority, right?
Kind of. I think for a long-term pick, yes, because Arsenal was so good. I mean, once Calafiori comes in, maybe at some point he comes in for Gabriel. It could happen. I don't think it's going to happen at the start of the season, but Arteta might play around with it eventually. Long-term, yes. The only thing for Arsenal, they've got 3 dodgy fixtures first 5, which is Villa, Spurs and Man City, all away from home. That's going to be difficult for clean sheets. I think if you pick an Arsenal defender, you need defenders that can rotate in for them in those more difficult fixtures. And that's where you need to be spending the 4.5 on probably players you know are still going to be playing in 3-4 weeks' time. I don't think you can take risks there. Like, if you had to play Gabriel or Saliba against Villa away, it's not the end of the world. They could go and get you a goal. You probably wouldn't want to play them in all 3 of those fixtures. I think that's just asking for trouble. So I think long-term, definitely Arsenal over Gvardiol. Shorter-term, because of the fixtures, I'd maybe just about go Man City, especially if you don't want to rotate the 4-5s. That's how I'm thinking about it right now. Yeah, anyway, team looking solid. I put it through the My Team on Fantasy Football Hub. I think anything 90-plus rating is pretty decent. 91. This
Ooh.
comes out. Actually thinks the AI tool actually thinks you should play Kwanzaa ahead of Smith Rowe in game week 1. Maybe it just rates the Man United defence. You never know, right? Possibly. So 91% looks good. The other thing you can do is run it through the suggested transfers. So I did that, and interestingly, right, we haven't talked beforehand. You didn't know what was coming up. It does think you should drop Gordon down to Brereton Diaz. Interestingly, that's mostly that is not because Brereton Diaz is going to score massively more points. That's to save 2 million.
Fair.
What do you think the two transfers are that's going to use the money on?
Definitely Isak, surely.
Yeah, Solanke to Isak.
Yeah.
And Porro to Vardiol.
Really?
Yeah, sorry, I should let you answer there. But yeah, Porro to Vardiol. So I think that's kind of interesting that you were kind of considering finding the money for those upgrades. And Gordon's the make weight. And again, the idea is not that Brereton Diaz is better than Gordon. It's just that he's 2 million cheaper, right? So something to think about.
Got to balance those books, haven't you, Andy? Exactly. I think the Pedro Porro is an interesting one as well because Spurs have been so leaky in pre-season.
And generally last year as well, right?
I just don't... I'm still questioning it whether it's worth it. I really don't know because 5.5 is good value for Pedro Porro if he's returning.
He definitely starts though, and you just talked about Vardy. I think his minutes will be good, but I can't be like 100% certain about it. Whereas Porro definitely starts, and he's so attacking as well. Like that's the balance. Do you take the minutes and the attacking threat, but the dodgy clean sheet potential, or do you go the other way around? Like that is the dilemma. But it's also a 0.5 saving.
I think deep down, Andy, we all know that fullbacks are better than centre-backs in fantasy football, and that is something that's like tugging at our souls, that we have to get the fullbacks in. Like, we don't want the centre-backs. So,
apart from Gabriel, he's a big favourite of mine. I love his goal threat. Yes.
Gabriel did me last season, not going to lie. He was the one that I had it at the wrong time. Just, luck in this game. So, it's a big one.
Absolutely. Good stuff. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me.
Perfect. It's been great to be here, Andy. Really has.
Go and follow Statman Dave if you're not already. I'll leave a link in the description below to a YouTube channel. Always doing loads of great stuff around football, stats, analysis. Much better than me. I'm not.
Whoa, Andy, you're the FPL GOAT.
FPL, I'm fine. Anything outside of that, I kind of lose a bit of track. And also on the Fantasy 606 podcast as well. Give it a like if you enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button. If you want to check out your recommended transfers as well, links in the description below to Fantasy Football Hub. Otherwise, Dave, I'll say thanks and goodbye.
Cheers. Cheers, Andy.
Catch you all again tomorrow.